Have you ever felt drained by the endless caliber debates? One week it's 9mm versus 45, the next it's 10mm versus 357 SIG, and somewhere in the middle you've got the internet flooded with charts, gel tests, and marketing claims that all seem to contradict each other. If you've spent any time in the firearms world, you know exactly what I mean. Everyone has an opinion, everyone has their data, and yet, none of it seems to settle the argument. That frustration is real. Because at the end of the day, you don't care about hype, you care about performance. You care about what works in the real world, what can actually give you an advantage when it matters most. And here's the revelation. For all the debates, all the so-called miracle calibers that have come and gone, one round from the early 1990s has quietly refused to die. In fact, it hasn't just survived, it's carved out a niche so unique, so stubbornly effective, that even in 2025, it still stands apart. I'm talking about the 5.7 by 28mm. Now, here's the thing. If you've been around long enough, you've heard the chatter. Some people call it overhyped, a gimmick, or just a fancy 9mm. Others call it revolutionary, pointing to its velocity, its armor-piercing roots, and its use by elite units. The truth? It's complicated. The 5.7 has always been surrounded by mystique. Part of that comes from FN's own secretive marketing, part from its appearance in pop culture, and part from the simple fact that very few people actually had access to it until recent years. But make no mistake, the 5.7 is not just a trendy round. It was born out of a very specific problem, designed for a very specific solution, and it has spent the last 3 decades proving its worth in ways most other calibers can only dream of. Think about it. How many cartridges come out, get hyped up, maybe even see some law enforcement or military testing, and then vanish into obscurity within a few years? The firearms world is littered with the graves of next big things. The 41 Magnum, the 45 GAP, the 224 Valkyrie, the list goes on. But the 5.7, it's still here, still relevant, still expanding into new platforms and gaining new fans every single year. That alone should tell you something. And yet, the 5.7 isn't just about survival, it's about dominance in a category no one else has truly managed to compete in. It's a pistol cartridge that behaves like a rifle round. It's a lightweight option that delivers high velocity, flat trajectory, and surprisingly controllable recoil. It's the kind of round that allows engineers to build weapons like the FNP-90 Compact, futuristic and brutally efficient at what it was designed to do. Here's what we're going to do today. We're going to cut through the myths, strip away the hype, and look at the undeniable truths of the 5.7 by 28mm. We'll talk about why it was created, what it does differently, and why even now, after decades of competition, after the rise of new calibers, and after countless internet debates, it still holds a place that no other cartridge has managed to dethrone. This isn't a fanboy rant, and it isn't a hit piece. This is about context, history, performance, and the real-world reasons the 5.7 refuses to fade away. Because in a firearms world that loves trends, the fact that one round has stayed relevant for over 30 years is worth paying attention to. So buckle up, because by the time we're done, you'll understand why the 5.7 by 28mm remains, even in 2025, the king without a crown. Origins and context. To really understand why the 5.7 by 28mm is still relevant today, you've got to go back to the late 1980s and early 1990s. The Cold War might have been winding down, but NATO was facing a real problem: body armor. By that point, advances in Kevlar and ceramic plates meant that the old workhorse 9mm wasn't cutting it anymore. Soldiers and security forces could wear vests that would shrug off standard pistol rounds, and suddenly the idea of a sidearm or a submachine gun as a last line of defense didn't look so reliable. NATO wanted something new. They put out a call for a cartridge that could do what 9mm couldn't: pierce soft body armor, remain controllable in fully automatic fire, and work in compact weapon systems. Basically, they were asking for a mini rifle round that could live inside a personal defense weapon. Enter F.N. Herstall. They came forward with a radical idea. A lightweight, bottlenecked cartridge that wasn't just an incremental improvement on existing handgun calibers, but something entirely different. That round was the 5.7 by 28 millimeter. It wasn't alone. Heckler & Koch was developing their own response at the time, the 4.6 by 30 millimeter for the MP7. But while Heckler & Koch option found some niche use, it was the FN design that really captured attention. Why? Because the 5.7 did exactly what NATO was asking for. Fired from the FNP-90, it could punch through soft body armor at ranges where 9mm and 45 ACP simply flattened out. And yet, here's the twist. Despite doing exactly what was asked, NATO never officially adopted it. Politics, budgets, competing interests, all of that got in the way. So instead of becoming the new NATO standard, the 5.7 slid into a different path. It became a specialist's tool. Certain military units, certain law enforcement groups, and of course eventually the civilian market. Now, here's where things get interesting. Most cartridges that lose the big military adoption race fade into obscurity. They become trivia questions or footnotes in gun history. But the 5.7 didn't. Why? Because it filled a gap that still existed. It solved a problem no one else had solved, and over time, that niche became its kingdom. And that's the foundation for everything we're about to dive into. Because understanding that origin, the body armor problem, the PDW philosophy, and FN's bold answer is the key to understanding why the 5.7 didn't just survive. It thrived. Velocity and terminal ballistics, a class of its own. When you talk about the 5.7 by 28 millimeter, the first thing that always jumps out is speed. Velocity. This cartridge lives in a category that most pistol calibers can only dream about. Let's put this in perspective. Your standard 9mm round usually leaves the muzzle somewhere between 1,100 and 1,200 feet per second, depending on the load. A 45 ACP? Even slower, often under 900 feet per second. But the 5.7? Out of a handgun like the FN57, you're looking at around 1,600 to 1,700 feet per second. Out of a compact carbine like the FNP90, you're easily pushing over 2,000 feet per second. That's rifle territory. And that's the whole point. This round was designed to act like a miniature rifle cartridge in terms of speed and penetration. Now, speed by itself doesn't mean much if the projectile can't do its job, and this is where the 5.7 gets misunderstood. A lot of critics will throw out the line, "Oh, it's just a small bullet going really fast, it pokes holes, but it doesn't do damage." That's the classic misconception. The reality is, the projectile design is what makes the difference. Because of its length to diameter ratio and the way it yawns and tumbles in soft tissue, the 5.7 doesn't just pencil through. It disrupts. It transfers energy more effectively than people give it credit for. In fact, the terminal performance often sits in a sweet spot between a handgun round and an intermediate rifle round. Think of it this way: 9mm punches hard but slows quickly. 5.56 is devastating, but requires a full-length rifle to get the velocity it needs. The 5.7? It lives in the middle ground. Out of a PDW, it penetrates armor that would stop 9mm cold. Out of a handgun, it delivers flatter trajectories, less recoil, and still enough disruption to matter. And recoil, that's another key advantage. When you fire a 45 ACP, you feel that heavy push. A 9mm has snap, sure, but it's manageable. The 5.7? It's almost shockingly mild for the performance you're getting. That controllability means faster follow-up shots, tighter groups, and a higher probability of hitting under stress. That's why this round was revolutionary when it came out. It wasn't about replacing rifles. It was about giving you rifle-like ballistics in a package you could carry on your hip or sling under a jacket. And in today's world, where body armor is more common not just for militaries, but even for certain criminals, the 5.7's ballistic edge has only become more relevant. It offers what 9mm and 45 ACPs simply can't: reliable penetration without turning the platform into a full-blown rifle. That's why, even in 2025, the velocity and terminal ballistics of the 5.7 remain unmatched. It's not hype, it's physics. And physics doesn't age out. Maneuverability and capacity, the PDW philosophy realized. One of the most overlooked reasons why the 5.7 by 28 mm still dominates in 2025 is maneuverability. This cartridge was never just about raw speed or exotic ballistics. It was about what it allowed firearm designers to build around it. Let's start with the FNP-90. Back in the 90s, NATO wanted a personal defense weapon, a compact platform that could give support troops, vehicle crews, and special units something more than a 9mm subgun, but without the burden of a full-sized rifle. FN's answer was the P90, and the only reason that platform worked the way it did was because of the 5.7. You had a weapon that was barely over 19 inches long, weighed under 7 pounds, fully loaded, and yet carried 50 rounds in a flush-fitting magazine. 50. That's not marketing fluff, that's a practical, battlefield-shaping advantage. Compare that to a 30-round AR magazine that sticks out like a handlebar, or to a typical pistol magazine with 15 to 17 rounds. The 5.7 allowed FN to reimagine what capacity could mean in such a small footprint. And then there's the recoil factor again. Because the 5.7 runs so flat and soft, shooters can dump an entire magazine from a P90 or a 5.7 handgun with an incredible degree of control. That controllability means less training time to achieve proficiency, fewer missed shots under stress, and ultimately, more confidence in the platform. Here's where it really matters. Close quarters environments. Think home defense, think vehicle security, think tight hallways or urban combat. In those situations, size and maneuverability are king. A traditional carbine might be too long, too heavy, or too cumbersome to bring up quickly. A pistol chambered in 9mm may lack the penetration and magazine capacity you need. But the 5.7 gives you both world's carbine-level capability in a sidearm or a PDW that you can move with in tight spaces. And we can't ignore logistics. A box of 50 rounds of 5.7 weighs significantly less than the equivalent firepower in 9mm or 45 ACP. That translates to soldiers or officers carrying more ammo without adding bulk. Every ounce matters when you're talking about sustained operations. Some critics argue, well, capacity doesn't matter if you don't need 50 rounds. But here's the thing, when your magazine carries that much without adding bulk, you don't lose anything by having it. And in a world where threats aren't predictable, having more on tap without sacrificing mobility is never a disadvantage. The 5.7 didn't just inspire the PDW philosophy, it realized it. The marriage between cartridge and platform unlocked levels of maneuverability and firepower balance that no other handgun caliber has been able to replicate in a true PDW format. And here we are, decades later, with modern updates like the Ruger 57 pistol, the CMMG Banshee, and other civilian-friendly platforms continuing that legacy. All of them exist because the 5.7 made that balance possible. Without this cartridge, the PDW as we know it simply wouldn't exist. Adaptability and niche dominance. If there's one thing that sets the 5.7 by 28mm apart from the sea of cartridges we've seen come and go, it's adaptability. Most calibers have their one big moment in the spotlight, then slowly fade into niche use, or worse, obscurity. But the 5.7 has proven itself to be something different. It's not just a cartridge, it's a solution that keeps evolving to meet the needs of those who adopt it. Let's start with the military and law enforcement angle. Back in the early 2000s, elite counter-terror and protective units around the world were quietly adopting the FNP-90 and the 5.7 pistol. Why? Because they faced a problem standard 9mm handguns simply couldn't solve: body armor. The 5.7 gave them a lightweight platform with armor-penetrating potential, high capacity, and controllability. That meant their operators could move fast and hit hard. Now, some people argue, but it never became the NATO standard, so how dominant can it really be? That misses the point entirely. The 5.7 was never meant to replace the 5.56 or the 9mm across the board. It was designed to fill a gap. And that's exactly what it has done: dominate its niche with no real rival. Fast forward to 2025, and the adaptability story gets even more interesting. We're not just talking about FN's original platforms anymore. Look at the Ruger 57 pistol. When it launched, skeptics thought it would flop, too niche, too expensive, ammo too rare. But what happened? It sold like crazy. Civilians finally had access to an affordable 5.7 handgun, and the ammo market followed. Manufacturers started stepping up production, and suddenly what used to be exotic became accessible. And that opened the floodgates. Companies like CMMG with the Banshee series brought 5.7 into the AR pistol world. Palmetto State Armory rolled out their rock pistol, undercutting competitors on price. Even boutique manufacturers are building suppressed, integrally ported platforms around it. This isn't the trajectory of a dying cartridge. This is the trajectory of one that has matured and expanded. But here's the kicker. Adaptability doesn't just mean more guns chambered in 5.7. It means the cartridge itself has continued to evolve. From specialized duty loads for law enforcement, to defensive hollow points optimized for civilian carry, to subsonic rounds designed specifically for suppression, this tiny case has proven it can be tailored to whatever role the end user needs. That's what niche dominance really looks like. While other calibers scramble to reinvent themselves, think about how many times the .40 caliber Smith & Wesson has tried to make a comeback. The 5.7 never had to beg for relevance. It simply carved out a role nobody else could fill, and then it adapted within that role. So today, whether you're an officer looking for armor-defeating capability, a civilian wanting lightweight firepower with low recoil, or a suppressed shooting enthusiast who values unique performance, the 5.7 has something for you. That's adaptability. That's niche dominance. And that's why, even 30 years later, nobody's really figured out how to compete with it. The future and unchallenged legacy. So here's the big question. Where does the 5.7 by 28mm go from here? After all, it's been over 3 decades since FN first unveiled it to the world. Most cartridges have either peaked and plateaued or slid into irrelevance after this much time. But the 5.7? It's still climbing. The secret lies in what we just talked about, adaptability. Every few years, new challengers step onto the stage. We've seen rounds marketed as the future of personal defense weapons, or the ultimate hybrid between rifle and pistol performance. The 224 Valkyrie was hyped as the next big long-range solution. The 30 Super Carry was supposed to revolutionize concealed carry. But here's the reality. None of them captured both the military and civilian imagination the way the 5.7 has. And that's because the 5.7 has something most cartridges don't, a unique combination that's almost impossible to replicate. Hypervelocity, minimal recoil, high capacity, armor penetration potential, and a proven track record across both tactical and civilian platforms. When you add all that up, the so-called competitors just look like marketing noise. Now let's talk ammo innovation. 2025 is seeing some of the most advanced projectile designs we've ever had for this cartridge. Polymer-tipped hollow points that expand consistently even at extreme velocities. Barrier-blind duty rounds that maintain penetration through autoglass and sheet metal. And yes, even subsonic loads, designed specifically for suppressor users, opening up a whole new dimension of 5.7 performance. This kind of ongoing development shows us something important. Ammo makers wouldn't keep investing in this cartridge if the demand wasn't there. And not just demand from civilians. Law enforcement contracts, military special unit procurement, and civilian enthusiasts all keep the 5.7 relevant. That continuous support means the future is secure. Think about legacy for a second. What other exotic cartridge from the 1990s can you name that's not only still alive but thriving? The 10mm auto had to be resurrected. The .40 Smith & Wesson is practically on life support. But the 5.7 never died. It never went away. Instead, it matured, transitioning from being seen as a strange, niche round into being recognized as a legitimate force in both professional and civilian worlds. And that's why I call it the king without a throne. It doesn't need to be the NATO standard. It doesn't need to replace the 5.56 or the 9mm. It rules its own domain, unchallenged, precisely because no one else has been able to build a cartridge that does all the same things at once. So what does the future look like? Expect to see even more platforms chambered in 5.7. Expect ammo costs to keep coming down as production scales. Expect new bullet designs to continue pushing the envelope. But most importantly, expect the 5.7 by 28mm to remain exactly what it has always been. A cartridge ahead of its time, still defining what a modern PDW and defensive caliber should be. 3 decades later, and it still hasn't met a true rival. That's not just staying power, that's legacy. And there you have it, the truth about the 5.7 by 28mm, why it refuses to fade away, and why it continues to dominate its own lane even in 2025. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think the 5.7 deserves the hype? Or do you believe another caliber is ready to take the crown? Drop your thoughts down in the comments. I always enjoy reading the debates from you guys. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells me you want to see more deep dive content like this. And of course, if you're new here and you enjoy no-nonsense firearm analysis without the fluff, consider subscribing and ringing that bell icon so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos. Trust me, we've got some big ones on the way. You're not going to want to miss them. Stay safe, train hard, and as always, thanks for watching.